Willow Creek. I returned to Willow Creek after 20 years away. The town had barely changed, a sleepy, picturesque place nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. I left when I was 18, determined never to come back. But here I was, after receiving a letter from an old friend, Rebecca, who begged me to return. Rebecca and I grew up together. She was always the curious one, the one who wanted to uncover the mysteries of our town. I wasn't as brave, content to let sleeping dogs lie. But Rebecca never stopped digging. Her letter spoke of discoveries, of dark secrets hidden beneath Willow Creek's charming facade. I arrived at her house late in the afternoon, but Rebecca was nowhere to be found. Her home was a mess, papers scattered everywhere, and the air felt heavy, as if it held secrets of its own. I picked up one of the papers and froze. It was an old newspaper article about the disappearance of children in the town, dated back to the early 1900s. My heart pounded as I read more. The disappearances were never solved, and the children were presumed dead. Rebecca had circled names and dates, making connections that led to the present day. She believed the disappearances were part of a ritual, one that ensured the town's prosperity and protection. I decided to stay in her house that night, hoping she would return. I fell asleep on the couch, clutching the old newspaper. In the middle of the night, I awoke to a soft humming sound, almost like a lullaby. I followed the sound to the basement, where I found a trapdoor hidden under a rug. Taking a deep breath, I opened the trapdoor and descended into the darkness. The air was damp and cold, and the humming grew louder. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a tunnel, dimly lit by old lanterns. I walked cautiously, my footsteps echoing through the narrow passage. The tunnel led to a large cavern, where I found Rebecca. She was standing in the center of the room, staring at an ancient stone altar. Around her were the remains of children, their skeletal hands clutching old toys. The sight was horrifying, and I called out to her, but she didn't respond. I approached her, noticing her vacant expression. It was as if she was in a trance. I shook her, trying to snap her out of it. Finally, her eyes focused on me, and she whispered, "They need a new sacrifice." Before I could react, the ground beneath us began to shake. The air filled with the sound of whispers, and the shadows on the walls seemed to come alive. Rebecca grabbed my hand, her grip tight and desperate. "We have to leave, now." We ran back through the tunnel, the whispers growing louder, almost deafening. As we reached the trapdoor, I felt something cold brush against my leg. I turned to see shadows reaching for us, their dark tendrils wrapping around my ankle. I kicked and struggled, finally breaking free. We burst out of the basement, slamming the trapdoor shut behind us. The humming stopped, and the house fell silent. Rebecca collapsed on the floor, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't know what I was getting into." She explained that she had discovered the town's dark secret. Every 50 years, a child had to be sacrificed to an ancient entity that protected Willow Creek. The townsfolk had kept this secret for generations, ensuring their prosperity at a terrible cost. Rebecca's research had drawn the entity's attention, and it demanded a new sacrifice. I knew we couldn't stay. We packed what we could and left Willow Creek that night. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the town shrouded in darkness, the ancient evil lurking just beneath the surface. We never spoke of that night again. Rebecca and I moved far away, starting new lives in a place untouched by darkness. But Willow Creek's secrets haunt us still. The whispers in the night, the cold touch of shadows, and the knowledge that some secrets are better left buried. Crescent Lodge. The rain poured down in sheets as I pulled up to the Crescent Lodge, its grand facade looming out of the mist like a specter. I had been driving for hours, and the storm had turned the winding mountain roads into treacherous paths. The sight of the old hotel was a welcome relief, promising warmth and shelter from the storm. Little did I know, The Crescent Lodge harbored more than just weary travelers. The lobby was dimly lit, the flickering chandeliers casting eerie shadows on the walls. An old man with a stern expression stood behind the front desk, his eyes following me as I approached. He handed me a brass key with a worn tag that read Room 217. "Be careful," he muttered, almost as if to himself. The lodge has a way of playing tricks on the mind. I nodded, not thinking much of it, and made my way to the elevator. The old contraption groaned and rattled as it carried me up to the second floor. The hallways were long and narrow, lined with dark wood paneling and faded carpets. A sense of unease settled over me as I walked to my room. Room 217 was at the far end of the corridor. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, grateful for the warmth that greeted me. The room was quaint, with antique furniture and a large four-poster bed. I set my bags down and decided to take a hot shower, hoping to shake off the chill that had settled in my bones. As the hot water cascaded over me, I felt a sense of relaxation wash over me. But that peace was short-lived. The bathroom lights flickered, and I heard a faint whisper, barely audible over the sound of the water. I turned off the shower, straining to hear. The whisper came again, clearer this time, a soft, mournful voice. "Help me." I quickly wrapped a towel around myself and stepped out of the bathroom, my heart pounding. The room was empty, but the whisper persisted, echoing through the walls. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or the old pipes, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The storm raged outside, and the wind howled like a lost soul. Sleep came fitfully, filled with strange dreams and disturbing images. I dreamt of a woman in a white dress, her eyes hollow and empty, standing at the foot of my bed, reaching out to me with cold, skeletal hands. I woke with a start. The room plunged into darkness. The power had gone out, leaving the hotel shrouded in an oppressive silence. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to navigate the room. As I reached for the door, I heard it again, the whisper, louder this time, desperate. "Help me, please." I couldn't ignore it any longer. Grabbing my phone and the room key, I stepped into the hallway. The air was colder here, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. I followed the voice, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The voice led me to the end of the hall, to a door that looked older and more worn than the others. The number on the door had been scratched out, leaving only deep gouges in the wood. I hesitated for a moment, then turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room beyond was cold and dark, filled with the scent of decay. My phone's light revealed a figure huddled in the corner, a woman in a tattered white dress, her face hidden by her long, matted hair. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with a haunting sorrow. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Help me find peace." I approached her slowly, feeling a chill that seemed to seep into my very soul. As I got closer, the room seemed to shift and warp, the walls closing in around me. The woman reached out, her hand passing through me like a cold breeze. Images flooded my mind, flashes of her life, her tragic death, and the years of torment she had endured, trapped in this place. I knew then what I had to do. I reached out and touched her hand, focusing all my energy on helping her move on. The room grew colder, and the shadows deepened, but I held on. Slowly, the woman's form began to fade, her sorrowful expression giving way to one of peace. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like a distant echo. "Thank you for setting me free." And then she was gone, leaving the room empty and silent. The oppressive chill lifted, and the air felt lighter. I returned to my room, my mind racing with what had just happened. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the bed and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, the storm had passed, and the sun shone brightly through the windows. I checked out of the hotel, the old man at the front desk, giving me a knowing look as I handed over the key. "You did a good thing," he said quietly. "The lodge has claimed many souls over the years. It's good to see one finally set free." I left the Crescent Lodge with a sense of closure, knowing that I had helped someone find peace. The experience would stay with me forever, a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the next, and the restless spirits that sometimes linger, waiting for someone to hear their whispers. Nightmares unleashed. I always thought nightmares were just figments of my imagination, fleeting and harmless. That was until one night changed everything. It started like any other restless slumber, tossing and turning as shadows danced across my bedroom walls. But this time, the shadows seemed more sinister, more real. I found myself in a familiar place, a twisted version of my childhood home. The wallpaper was peeling, and the once cozy rooms now felt oppressive and cold. The air was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread, making it hard to breathe. I wandered through the darkened halls, the creaking floorboards echoing my every step. It was then that I noticed something was off. The pictures on the walls, once filled with happy memories, now depicted scenes of terror and despair. As I moved deeper into the house, I heard a faint whispering. It grew louder with each step, the words becoming clearer. "You're not safe here," it warned. I turned a corner and came face to face with my childhood fear, a monstrous figure with glowing red eyes and a menacing grin. It was the creature from my nightmares, the one that had haunted me for years. But this time, it wasn't just a dream. It was real, and it was coming for me. I tried to run, but my legs felt like they were wading through quicksand. The creature's laughter echoed through the halls, mocking my futile attempts to escape. I stumbled into the living room, where I saw my parents, their faces twisted in agony as they relived their worst nightmares. I wanted to help them, but I was paralyzed by fear. The creature's icy grip wrapped around my arm, pulling me closer. "Wake up!" I screamed, desperately trying to break free. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape its grasp. The line between dream and reality blurred, and I began to question if I was still asleep. The creature leaned in closer, its breath hot against my ear. "This is your reality now," it hissed. Suddenly, I jolted awake, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. My bedroom was just as I had left it, but something felt different. The shadows on the walls seemed darker, more menacing. I glanced at the clock. It was 3:33 a.m. The witching hour. I tried to shake off the lingering fear, convincing myself it was just a nightmare. But when I looked down, I saw bruises on my arm, exactly where the creature had grabbed me. Panic set in as I realized the truth. The nightmares had found a way into my reality, and there was no escaping them. Every night since then, I've been trapped in a relentless cycle of terror. The lines between dreams and reality have completely dissolved, and the creatures of my nightmares roam freely in my waking world. I see them lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sleep has become a luxury I can no longer afford, and every waking moment is filled with dread. I don't know how much longer I can endure this living nightmare. But one thing is certain: I am no longer safe, not in my dreams, and not in reality. The creatures have been unleashed, and they will stop at nothing to consume me. If you find yourself reading this, beware. The nightmares are real, and they are coming for you next. Ashwood. It was the summer of 1999 when I moved to Ashwood, a quaint little town nestled deep in the heart of rural America. I was fresh out of college, eager to start my new job as a journalist for the local newspaper. Ashwood seemed perfect, peaceful, charming, and full of friendly faces. But there was something else too, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end every time I walked through its quiet streets. My first assignment was to cover the town's annual Harvest Festival, a celebration that had been held for as long as anyone could remember. The townsfolk spoke of it with a mix of pride and reverence, but there was an undercurrent of something darker that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I decided to dig deeper, hoping to uncover a story that would make my name in journalism. One evening, while browsing through the dusty archives of the town library, I came across an old, leather-bound journal. It belonged to a woman named Eliza Thornton, who had lived in Ashwood over a century ago. Her entries were filled with the mundane details of everyday life, but one passage caught my eye. October 13th, 1899, the harvest festival approaches, and with it, the choosing. The town's prosperity depends on it, they say, but at what cost? I fear for my dear James. The elders grow more secretive each year. The choosing. I had never heard of such a thing. Intrigued, I read on, and the entries grew more disturbing. Eliza spoke of strange rituals, of children going missing, and of an ancient, unspoken pact. My heart raced as I realized I had stumbled upon something far darker than I had anticipated. Determined to uncover the truth, I started asking questions around town. Most people dismissed me with nervous laughter, but a few old-timers hinted at the town's sinister past. They spoke of the elders, a group of influential townspeople who guarded the town's secrets with a zeal that bordered on fanaticism. One night, as I was walking home from the library, I noticed a figure following me. I quickened my pace, but the figure matched my speed. Panic set in, and I darted into a narrow alley, pressing myself against the cold brick wall. The figure passed by, and I caught a glimpse of his face, one of the elders, his eyes filled with a chilling intensity. I knew I was in danger, but I couldn't stop now. The night before the harvest festival, I broke into the town hall, hoping to find more evidence of the town's dark secret. I stumbled upon a hidden room behind a false wall, filled with old books and scrolls. In the center of the room was a large, ornate chest. Inside, I found documents detailing a pact made with an ancient entity known as the Harvester. The pact promised prosperity and protection for the town in exchange for a child, chosen every 50 years, to be sacrificed during the harvest festival. My blood ran cold as I realized the significance of Eliza Thornton's journal. Her son, James, had likely been one of those sacrifices. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and I was surrounded by the elders. They had known I was getting too close to the truth. They grabbed me, and despite my struggles, they dragged me to the town square, where the preparations for the festival were underway. The townspeople watched in silence as the elders accused me of trespassing and disrupting the sacred traditions of Ashwood. I was thrown into a makeshift cell beneath the town hall, left to await my fate. Hours passed, and the sounds of the festival drifted down to my dark prison. I knew I had to escape. Desperation gave me strength, and I managed to pry open a loose stone in the wall, creating a narrow passage to the outside. I emerged into the cool night air, the festival in full swing around me. I could see the bonfire in the distance. The townspeople gathered in a circle, chanting in a language I didn't understand. In the center of the circle was a young boy, his eyes wide with fear. I had to save him. With the last of my strength, I charged towards the bonfire, shouting for the townspeople to stop. The chanting ceased, and all eyes turned to me. I grabbed the boy, pulling him away from the fire. The elders advanced, but the townspeople hesitated, uncertain. I held up the documents I had found, shouting about the ancient pact and the truth behind the sacrifices. Murmurs of shock and disbelief rippled through the crowd. The elders tried to regain control, but their power was broken. The townspeople turned on them, their anger and betrayal palpable. In the chaos, I fled with the boy, determined to get as far away from Ashwood as possible. We made it to the next town by morning, where I contacted the authorities. An investigation was launched, and the truth about Ashwood's dark history was finally brought to light. The town of Ashwood still stands, but it is a shadow of its former self. The harvest festival is no more, and the elders are gone. But the memories of that night haunt me still. I often wonder about the other children, the ones who weren't saved. Their spirits linger in the shadows of Ashwood, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath even the most idyllic of communities. Silverwood Inn. The rain was coming down hard as I pulled into the parking lot of the old Silverwood Inn, a grand but weathered hotel perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean. I had been driving for hours, and the thought of a warm bed and a hot meal was enough to make me ignore the unsettling tales I had heard about the place. The inn had a reputation for being haunted, but I was too tired to care. The lobby was a relic of a bygone era, with high ceilings, ornate chandeliers, and faded tapestries depicting scenes of the sea. A woman with a stern, pale face stood behind the front desk. Her eyes seemed to follow me as I approached. "Welcome to the Silverwood Inn," she said in a voice that was as cold as the rain outside. "Room 304. Enjoy your stay." She handed me an old-fashioned key with a brass tag. I thanked her and made my way to the elevator, which creaked and groaned as it ascended to the third floor. The hallways were dimly lit, and the shadows seemed to dance on the walls as I walked to my room. Room 304 was at the end of the corridor. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, grateful for the warmth that greeted me. The room was charming in an old-world way, with antique furniture and a large canopy bed. I unpacked my bag, took a quick shower, and decided to head down to the dining room for dinner. The dining room was nearly empty, save for a few other guests scattered at various tables. I chose a seat near the window, watching the rain lash against the glass. My meal was served by a silent, sullen waiter who disappeared as quickly as he appeared. The food was surprisingly good, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I finished my meal, I noticed an old man sitting at a corner table, staring at me intently. His eyes were dark and piercing, and he gave me a slight nod as our eyes met. Unnerved, I hurried back to my room, locking the door behind me. That night, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, like the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. But as the hours passed, they grew louder, more insistent. I tossed and turned, trying to ignore them, but sleep was elusive. Eventually, I got up and decided to explore the inn, hoping to tire myself out enough to fall asleep. The hallways were eerily quiet, the only sound the soft patter of rain against the windows. I wandered through the dimly lit corridors, feeling a chill in the air. As I turned a corner, I saw the old man from the dining room standing at the end of the hall, staring at me with those dark, piercing eyes. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. He didn't respond, just turned and walked away. I followed him, my curiosity piqued, but he seemed to vanish around the next corner. Frustrated, I made my way back to my room. As I approached room 304, I noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar, even though I was sure I had locked it. I pushed it open cautiously, my heart pounding. Inside, the room was as I had left it, except for one thing, a small, old-fashioned key lying on the bed. I picked up the key, examining it closely. It was similar to the one I had for my room, but older, more worn. I had a feeling it was important, but I didn't know why. As I pondered its significance, the whispers returned, louder and more urgent than before. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to explore the inn further. I took the key and headed back into the hallway. The whispers seemed to guide me, leading me down a series of twisting corridors and narrow staircases. Eventually, I found myself in front of a door marked basement. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door with the old key and descended the creaky wooden stairs. The basement was dark and damp, filled with the musty scent of decay. The whispers were almost deafening now, echoing off the stone walls. In the center of the basement was a large, wooden trunk, covered in dust and cobwebs. I approached it slowly, my heart racing. As I reached out to open the trunk, the whispers stopped, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Inside the trunk, I found a collection of old photographs, letters, and a leather-bound journal. The photos were of the inn in its heyday, filled with smiling guests and lively gatherings. But as I flipped through them, the images grew darker, showing scenes of despair and sorrow. The letters told a tale of tragedy of a family who had owned the inn, cursed by the sea. They spoke of strange occurrences, of guests disappearing, and of a dark presence that haunted the inn. The journal belonged to the old man I had seen, detailing his attempts to uncover the truth and break the curse. As I read the final entry, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see the old man standing there, his expression one of sorrow and resignation. "You must finish what I started," he said, his voice a mere whisper. "You must set us free." He pointed to a small, hidden door at the back of the basement. Inside, I found a stone altar, covered in strange symbols and surrounded by candles. I knew what I had to do. Following the instructions in the journal, I performed the ritual, my hands shaking as I chanted the ancient words. The air grew colder, and the room was filled with a blinding light. The whispers turned to screams, and I felt a wave of darkness wash over me. When the light faded, the basement was silent, and the oppressive feeling had lifted. I returned to my room, exhausted but relieved. The curse had been broken, and the spirits of the Silverwood Inn were finally at peace. The next morning, I checked out, the stern woman at the front desk giving me a knowing nod as I handed over the key. As I drove away, the rain had stopped, and the sun peeked through the clouds. The Silverwood Inn was a place of beauty and history once more, its dark past finally laid to rest. I would never forget the night I spent there, and the whispers that guided me to uncover its secrets. Hollow Creek. The return to Hollow Creek was never part of my plan. Yet, here I was, standing on the worn-out porch of my grandparents' old house, the air heavy with nostalgia and something far more sinister. I had come back to settle their estate after their sudden passing, a task I approached with a mix of duty and dread. Hollow Creek was a small town, the kind where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were hard to keep. But there was one secret the town had guarded fiercely, one that I was about to uncover. The first few days were uneventful. I sorted through old photos, mementos, and letters. But then I found it. A small, leather-bound diary hidden in the attic, its pages yellowed with age. It belonged to my grandmother, and as I began to read, a sense of unease settled over me. June 12, 1963, they came again last night. The whispers are growing louder. I fear what they want. The entries were filled with cryptic references to the Whispers and the Watchers, beings that seemed to haunt my grandmother's dreams. I dismissed it at first, chalking it up to the imagination of an old woman. But as the days passed, I started hearing things too faint, disembodied whispers that seemed to come from the walls. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to explore the house. Armed with a flashlight, I ventured into the basement, a place I had always avoided as a child. The air was damp and cold, and the musty smell of decay hung heavy. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I followed the sound to a corner of the basement, where I found a small, hidden door. It was locked, but the key was nearby, hidden under a loose brick. My hands trembled as I turned the key and opened the door, revealing a narrow, stone-lined passageway. The passage led deep underground, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I descended. The walls were lined with strange symbols, etched into the stone with meticulous care. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now, urging me forward. At the end of the passage, I found a large, circular chamber. In the center was an ancient stone altar, covered in a dark, viscous substance that looked disturbingly like blood. Surrounding the altar were the remains of small animals, their bodies arranged in intricate patterns. I felt a wave of nausea and fear, but I couldn't turn back. I approached the altar, and as I did, the whispers became clear, forming words that chilled me to the bone. The sacrifice must be made. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around to see the town's mayor, Mr. Whitaker, standing in the entrance to the chamber. His eyes were filled with a strange, otherworldly light, and he smiled a cold, malevolent smile that sent shivers down my spine. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice echoing eerily in the chamber. "This is a sacred place, a place of power. The Watchers demand their due." Before I could react, he lunged at me. I dodged, grabbing a heavy stone from the floor and swinging it with all my might. It connected with his head, and he collapsed, blood pooling around him. The whispers grew frenzied, almost screaming now, and the chamber began to shake. I knew I had to get out. I ran back through the passageway, up the stairs, and out of the house. The whispers followed me, growing fainter as I reached the street. I didn't stop running until I reached the town square, where I collapsed, gasping for breath. The townspeople gathered around, their faces masks of confusion and concern. I told them everything: the diary, the basement, the altar, the mayor. At first, they didn't believe me, but when they saw the blood on my hands and the terror in my eyes, they knew I was telling the truth. An investigation was launched, and the truth about Hollow Creek's dark secret came to light. For generations, the town had been making sacrifices to appease the Watchers, ensuring their protection and prosperity. My grandparents had tried to stop it, and they paid the ultimate price. The altar was destroyed, the passageway sealed, and the town vowed never to speak of it again. But the whispers never left me. They haunt my dreams, a constant reminder of the darkness that once lurked beneath Hollow Creek. I left the town, but it will never leave me. The Watchers are always watching, always waiting, and I know that one day they will come for me. Blackwood Grove. Returning to Blackwood Grove was like stepping into a time capsule. The same old houses lined the streets, the same ancient trees swayed in the breeze, and the same eerie feeling lingered in the air. My childhood home stood at the end of a long, winding road, its windows dark and empty. I had come back to finalize the sale of the house after my parents' passing, a task I faced with a heavy heart. The first night back, I couldn't sleep. The creaks and groans of the old house kept me awake, stirring memories I had long since buried. I decided to explore the attic, a place I had avoided since I was a child. The narrow staircase was steep and dusty, and the air grew colder with each step. In the attic, I found boxes of old photos, journals, and knickknacks. One box caught my attention. It was marked with my name. Inside, I found an old doll, some faded drawings, and a small, leather-bound journal. I didn't remember ever seeing it before, but the handwriting was unmistakably my mother's. As I flipped through the pages, a sense of unease settled over me. The entries started off mundane, recounting everyday events. But as I read on, the tone changed. My mother wrote of strange occurrences: doors opening on their own, whispers in the night, shadows that moved when no one was there. The last entry sent chills down my spine. October 31st, 1995, they've come again. The shadows are restless. I fear what they want. I must protect them. I remembered that night. Halloween, 1995. I had been 10 years old. My mother had insisted we stay inside, away from the festivities. I thought she was just being overprotective. But now, I wasn't so sure. Determined to uncover the truth, I continued reading. The entries hinted at an ancient curse, one that had plagued our family for generations. My mother believed that the shadows were spirits, restless and vengeful, demanding something from us. But what? That night, the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I listened, I realized it was more than that. The whispers seemed to be coming from the walls, the floors, everywhere. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, insistent. I spent the next day researching, Digging through old family records and local legends, I discovered that our family had once been the caretakers of Blackwood Grove, tasked with guarding a secret buried deep within the woods. A secret that, according to legend, could never be allowed to escape. That evening, I ventured into the woods, following the path my ancestors had taken centuries ago. The trees closed in around me, and the air grew colder, but I pressed on. I came upon a clearing, at the center of which stood an ancient stone well, covered in moss and vines. This was the source of the curse. The whispers grew louder as I approached the well, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I had to do something, but what? I reached into the well, feeling around in the darkness until my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. I pulled it out, a small, ornate box, covered in strange symbols. I opened the box and found a piece of parchment, old and brittle. The writing was in a language I didn't recognize, but I could feel the power emanating from it. As I held the parchment, the whispers intensified, almost deafening now. In a moment of clarity, I realized what I had to do. The curse needed to be broken, and the only way to do that was to destroy the source. I threw the parchment back into the well, along with the box, and stepped back. The ground began to tremble, and the whispers turned into screams. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the safety of my home. The next morning, the woods were quiet. The oppressive feeling that had hung over Blackwood Grove for as long as I could remember was gone. The curse had been broken. I finalized the sale of the house and left Blackwood Grove, vowing never to return. But the memory of that night and the whispers will stay with me forever. Some secrets are meant to be buried, and some curses are best left undisturbed. Cedar Pine. Returning to Cedar Pines for my best friend Sarah's wedding felt like stepping back into a past I had long left behind. The small town was as picturesque as ever, with its quaint houses and tree-lined streets. The air was filled with the scent of pine and the distant sound of laughter and celebration. Yet, as I drove through the familiar roads, an unsettling feeling gnawed at the back of my mind. Sarah and I had been inseparable growing up. We shared secrets, dreams, and fears, our bond unbreakable, or so I thought. I left Cedar Pines abruptly after high school, escaping a darkness I couldn't explain. Sarah stayed behind, our communication dwindling to occasional messages and holiday greetings. Now, she was getting married, and her invitation brought me back to a place I had vowed never to return. As I pulled into the driveway of her parents' house, memories flooded back. The old swing set where we spent countless afternoons, the treehouse where we made plans for the future, all now felt shrouded in an eerie stillness. Sarah greeted me with a warm hug, her joy infectious. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her eyes, though bright, held a hint of worry. I dismissed it as wedding jitters, but the unease lingered. The wedding was set to take place at the old chapel on the outskirts of town. That night, I stayed in the guest room of Sarah's parents' house. The whispers started around midnight. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees, but as I lay in bed, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost desperate. The next morning, I asked Sarah if she had heard anything strange during the night. She brushed it off with a nervous laugh, but her eyes betrayed her fear. "It's just the old house," she said. "It makes noises." The day of the wedding arrived, and the chapel was decorated beautifully. Friends and family gathered, and the air was filled with excitement. As the ceremony began, I felt a chill run down my spine. The whispers returned, growing louder with each passing minute. I glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice. When it was my turn to give a toast at the reception, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. I raised my glass, but before I could speak, the lights flickered, and the room was plunged into darkness. The whispers turned into a cacophony of voices, and the air grew cold. Panic spread through the room as people fumbled for their phones and flashlights. In the chaos, I saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the room, watching us with glowing eyes. I blinked, and it was gone. The lights came back on, and the room fell silent. The festive atmosphere shattered. Sarah pulled me aside, her face pale. "We need to talk," she said, leading me outside. We walked to the edge of the property, where the forest began. "There's something I never told you," she began, her voice trembling. She told me about the curse that plagued Cedar Pines, a darkness that had been kept at bay by rituals performed in secret by the town's elders. The last ritual had taken place on the night I left town, and without it, the darkness had started to seep back in. The whispers were the voices of those who had been lost to the curse, warning us of the impending doom. Sarah's wedding was the perfect time for the darkness to strike, she explained. The gathering of so many people, the joy and celebration, it was like a beacon for the evil that lurked in the shadows. The shadowy figure I had seen was a harbinger of what was to come. Desperate to protect her and the town, I agreed to help perform the ritual. We gathered the necessary items and made our way to the chapel's basement, where the original rituals had been conducted. The air was thick with anticipation and fear as we set up the altar and began the incantations. As we chanted, the whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a storm. The shadowy figure reappeared, closer this time, its eyes burning with malevolent intent. We continued, our voices trembling but unwavering. With a final, powerful incantation, a blinding light filled the room, and the whispers ceased. When the light faded, the shadow was gone, and an eerie silence settled over the chapel. The ritual had worked. The darkness was banished, and Cedar Pines was safe for now. Sarah and I emerged from the basement, exhausted but relieved. The guests had no idea what had transpired, the wedding continuing as if nothing had happened. But Sarah and I knew the truth. The bond we shared as children had saved the town, and our friendship was stronger than ever. As I left Cedar Pines the next day, I knew I would return. The town still held its secrets, but now I was part of its legacy. The darkness might come back, but as long as we stood together, we would be ready. Millstone. Returning to Millstone was like stepping into a ghost town of memories. The same old buildings lined the streets, but they seemed smaller, less significant than they had been during my childhood. The occasion was a somber one, Coach Peterson's funeral. He had been more than just a coach. He was a mentor, a father figure to many of us. His unexpected death had shaken the community to its core, and I felt an undeniable pull to pay my respects. The high school gym, where so many of us had spent countless hours training and playing under his watchful eye, had been transformed into a makeshift chapel for the funeral. The bleachers were filled with familiar faces, all gathered to honor the man who had shaped our lives in so many ways. As I took my seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Coach Peterson had always been a larger-than-life figure, his booming voice and infectious energy filling any room he entered. Seeing his casket at the front of the gym, surrounded by flowers and photos, felt surreal. The eulogies were heartfelt, each one painting a picture of a man dedicated to his players and his community. But beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of tension, a sense that not everything was as it seemed. After the service, I wandered through the halls of the high school, memories flooding back with every step. I found myself in the locker room, the smell of sweat and liniment bringing back a rush of nostalgia. As I stood there, lost in thought, I heard a faint whisper. I turned, expecting to see someone, but the room was empty. The whisper came again, more insistent this time. It was a voice I recognized, Coach Peterson's. My heart raced as I followed the sound, leading me to his old office. The door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated before pushing it open. The room was just as I remembered it, cluttered with trophies, photos, and stacks of playbooks. On the desk was a small, leather-bound journal. It looked out of place among the chaos, almost as if it had been left there for me to find. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and began to read. The entries were mundane at first, detailing game strategies and player statistics. But as I read on, the tone shifted. October 25th, 2019, there's something wrong. I've been seeing shadows, hearing whispers. It's like the school is alive, watching, waiting. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like I'm being followed. The entries grew more frantic, detailing strange occurrences, lights flickering, doors slamming shut, and the feeling of being watched. Coach Peterson wrote about a presence he couldn't shake, a darkness that seemed to be closing in on him. The last entry was dated the day before his death. November 12th, 2019, I can't escape it. The shadows are everywhere, and the whispers won't stop. I fear for my life, but more than that, I fear for my players. If anyone finds this, know that I'm sorry. I tried to protect you all, but the darkness is too strong. I felt a chill run down my spine as I finished reading. Could Coach Peterson's death have been more than just a tragic accident? The whispers returned, louder now, filling the room with an eerie, otherworldly sound. I looked around, searching for the source, but found nothing. Desperate for answers, I decided to investigate further. I went to the gym's basement, a place that had always given me the creeps. The whispers grew louder as I descended the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, I found a door that I had never noticed before. It was old and worn, covered in strange symbols that looked ancient. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. Inside, I found a small, dimly lit room filled with strange artifacts and old books. In the center of the room was a large, black stone, pulsing with an eerie, dark energy. The whispers were deafening now, and I could feel the presence that Coach Peterson had written about. As I approached the stone, a figure materialized before me. It was Coach Peterson, but his face was twisted in pain and fear. "You have to destroy it," he whispered, his voice echoing in the small room. "It's the source of the darkness. Destroy it before it's too late." With trembling hands, I grabbed a heavy, iron rod from the floor and brought it down on the stone with all my strength. The stone cracked, and a blinding light filled the room. The whispers turned into screams, and I felt a wave of darkness wash over me before everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of the basement, the stone shattered into pieces. The air was clear, the oppressive feeling gone. Coach Peterson's figure had vanished, but I felt his presence, a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. I left Millstone the next day, but the memory of that night stayed with me. Coach Peterson had given his life to protect us, even in death. The darkness that had plagued him was gone, but the lesson he taught me remained. Some secrets are buried for a reason, and some battles are fought in the shadows. As I drove away from the town, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The school stood tall, a beacon of hope and resilience. I knew I would never forget the sacrifice Coach Peterson made, and I would honor his memory by living a life of courage and integrity, just as he had taught me. I grew up in Pine Hollow, a quaint little town nestled in the heart of nowhere. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were whispered, but never spoken aloud. I left for college, vowing never to return, but life had a funny way of pulling me back. After my parents passed away, I found myself back in the old family home, sorting through their belongings and confronting the ghosts of my past. The town hadn't changed much. The same faces greeted me at the general store, the same smiles that never reached their eyes. There was a suffocating familiarity to it all, a sense that Pine Hollow was trapped in time. But there was something else too, something I hadn't noticed before, a darkness lurking just beneath the surface. It started with the dreams. Night after night, I found myself wandering through the town, the streets eerily empty. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, convinced that someone or something was watching me. Then there were the noises. Strange, unearthly sounds that echoed through the night, piercing the silence and leaving me wide awake, clutching my sheets in terror. One evening, I decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The streets were deserted, as usual, and an uneasy stillness hung in the air. I found myself drawn to the old church at the edge of town, a place I had always avoided as a child. Its tall, spindly steeple loomed over me like a skeletal finger pointing to the heavens. As I approached, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed it open, the creaking hinges echoing through the empty sanctuary. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay, and a sense of dread settled over me. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing on the cold stone floor. At the far end of the room, a faint light flickered, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. I moved closer, my breath catching in my throat as I saw what was causing the light, a small, flickering candle placed in front of an old, dusty book. The pages were yellowed with age, and as I leaned in to read, a chill ran down my spine. The book was a ledger, filled with names and dates, each entry more disturbing than the last. I recognized many of the names friends, neighbors, people I had known my whole life. But the dates, they were all dates of deaths. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, and then I saw my parents' names, listed together with a date that didn't match their supposed accident. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. What was this? A record of some kind of twisted game. I had to know more. I grabbed the book and ran home, locking myself in my parents' old study. I spent the next few days poring over the entries, trying to make sense of it all. It soon became clear that the deaths were no accidents. They were sacrifices. Pine Hollow had a dark history, one that had been buried and forgotten, or so they thought. The town had made a pact generations ago, a pact with something ancient and evil. In exchange for prosperity and protection, they offered lives, innocent lives. My parents had discovered the truth, and they had paid the price. Armed with this knowledge, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I started asking questions, probing into places I shouldn't. It didn't take long for the town to notice. The friendly faces grew cold, and the polite smiles turned to scowls. I began receiving threats, warnings to stop digging, to leave the past buried. But I couldn't, not after what I had learned. One night, as I was reviewing my notes, the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, and I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside. Panic set in, and I grabbed the book, clutching it to my chest as I hid in the basement. The door burst open, and I could hear them moving through the house, searching for me. They were going to kill me, just like they had killed my parents. But I wouldn't go down without a fight. I found an old rusted pipe and held it tightly, ready to defend myself. As the footsteps grew closer, I could see their shadows on the basement stairs. My heart pounded in my chest, and I knew this was it. But just as they reached the bottom step, a loud, piercing scream echoed through the house. The intruders froze, and I took my chance, swinging the pipe with all my strength. I managed to escape, running through the night until I reached the nearest town. I went to the authorities, told them everything. But when they investigated, Pine Hollow was deserted. The town had vanished, leaving behind nothing but empty buildings and dark memories. I never found out what happened to the people of Pine Hollow. Some say they left, others believe they were taken. But I know the truth. The darkness that lurked beneath the surface had finally claimed them, and I was lucky to escape with my life. I've never gone back, but the nightmares continue. The sound of footsteps, the flickering candle, the names in the ledger. I can never forget, and I can never forgive. Pine Hollow's dark secrets will haunt me forever.